Hey, I get it. Negotiating close to your important quota deadlines, whether it's month, quarter, or year end, can be one of the most nerve-wracking things that a salesperson can do. There's a lot of personal pressure, there's a lot of reputational pressure, and sometimes when it comes to discounting, we tend to give away more revenue than we need to when we find ourselves in these high-pressure situations. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to demystify this whole negotiating it year, month, quarter end process for you and give you some really easy, tangible tips that you can use to not only preserve more of your precious revenue, but also your sanity as well. Welcome back to another episode of Sales Lab Live. I'm David Premer. You see, I'm rocking the red lights here today rather than the blue light. You know, you're used to the kind of the regular blue lights like this, but it's quarter end, it's month end, it's year end, so you know it's full on red alert here. And I want to help you, like I said, preserve not only your revenue but your sanity as well, because I know negotiating in these very intense periods can be tricky and difficult. So let's get right into it. Let's get right into the slidage we got here, negotiating at month end. Now, you know, one of the biggest tips, one of the easiest tips I can give you as far as negotiating at month end, and this is kind of based on data as well, is try not to do it. You know, to the extent, I know, we left a lot of stuff to the last minute. You know, but I'll tell you, one of the worst things you can do is negotiate close to your deadline because of all the things that we just spoke about. But I will tell you, and I don't want you to use this as a tip against my old friends in Ohana at Salesforce, but one of the things I did when I was back at Salesforce, I took a look at a report and I said, you know, I want to see what percentage discounts my reps were giving on every single day of the month. And one of the things I noticed, and it was very, very clear, that the average discount that we were giving to customers in the last week of every month, and we were a monthly business, as I'm sure many of you are as well, the discounts we were giving in the last week of the month were, I hope no one's watching, double what we were giving in the first 3 weeks of the month. So the reality of discounting deeper than we need to at month end is a real thing. And in fact, part of the challenge is because historically that's what's done, a lot of customers' renewals for their contracts come up around month end, quarter end, whatever it is. And so it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where we train our customers essentially to buy from us at month end. That propagates throughout our entire business from years to come. And then all these renewals come up and then we just kind of end up in this vicious cycle. So to the extent that you can not negotiate close to your month end deadline, you're going to be in great shape. And in fact, there's a story I often tell about one of my reps back at Salesforce. She was fantastic. She was one of the most consistent sales reps I had on my team. And what she did was she changed what I refer to as the circadian rhythm of her month. So rather than assuming that, like, let's say the 30th was the end of every month, she almost assumed that like the 15th was the end of her month. And of course, because your customers don't give a shit about month end in terms of your month end, right? She basically pretended that the 15th of the month was like her month end. So she had a little bit of, wiggle room to close deals in a timely manner. She wasn't ever flustered. She didn't ever present as flustered or desperate to her customers because, again, they didn't care and it wasn't really, really her month end. And at the end of the actual month, she was busy building pipeline while all of the other reps were kind of, running around scrambling. And she was the most consistent rep, hitting, 105, 107, 103% of her quota every single month. Now, I know that kind of mind control is really, really hard, but it just goes to show that at the end of the month, we tend to get all bonkers and out of control when it comes to a customer who says, oh yeah, like we can potentially sign this deal if only we had such and such a discount. And by the way, this is going to be a video for another time, but this concept of you're exchanging money in consideration of timing, right? Meaning I'm willing to give away money because I want you to close the deal on time. This is what I refer to, or what is referred to as kind of the exchange of items of unequal value. I probably talked about it on these channels before. I'll do a dedicated video on it. And so it's okay to offer discounts in exchange for expediency, but I'm going to show you, you don't have to give the magnitude of discounts that you typically might at the end of the month, end of the quarter. Now, I'm going to give you a bunch of tips, a bunch of tactics to not only, like I said, preserve your revenue, but also preserve your sanity. The first thing I want to talk about, tip number one, is just stay calm and believe in your value. Because don't kid yourself. Your customers can know and feel what it's like for you at the end of your month, at the end of your quarter, and they can feel that nervousness and they can take advantage of it, right? And part of the challenge is for us as sellers, we sometimes become encumbered by our own knowledge. And this is like a whole other narrative I have on why kids make the best negotiators. This might be for a video for another time, but if you want to check it out, I wrote this article about being a better negotiator, I say, by forgetting everything you know. And the concept here is that sometimes at the end of the month, end of the quarter, we kind of get into this mindset of, yeah, it's the end of the month, end of the quarter, it's time to discount and wheel and deal and offer all these things. Meanwhile, our customers don't necessarily have a conception of that. Certainly if they bought from us before and are acclimatized to buying from us at the end of the month, they might request these discounts. But for any other customer, if we act calm and believe in our value and almost pretend as though, yeah, like whether you buy from me now or whether you buy from me, a week or two from now, we're not going to be offering a 20, 30% discount for you to, sign right now. The most, and I want you to watch my last video on deliberate discounting. I'll try to, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll try to link it up in the cards above. But this idea of deliberate discounting, if you pick deliberate numbers, create satisfaction in the process, believe in your value. So instead of jumping to like the 20%, 15%, try 3%, try 7.5%, right? Just stay calm, believe in your value, and aim higher. And again, this goes back to some really interesting data that I found at Salesforce, where interestingly, I found that my newer reps were actually giving away fewer discounts than my experienced reps. And why? Because the newer reps were operating with this beginner's mind. They were unencumbered, right, by knowledge of like, typically at the end of the month, end of the quarter, things get nuts and I give away these discounts. So if you adopt that beginner's mind and act as if you have tremendous value. Your value, by the way, does not diminish just because it's the end of the month, end of the quarter. Your customers will believe in that value too, 1,000%. So, tip number 1, keep calm and believe in your value. Tip number 2, and I just wrote an article about this not too long ago. This is, again, another fascinating and really simple tip that you can use. It's science, it's data-backed, and I want to share it with you now more explicitly, is just to simply ask if the concession that the customer might be asking for is a deal breaker, right? And we get all crazy at the end of the month, end of the quarter. Sometimes our customers come to us and they say, maybe we can close by the end of this month, David, but we need, quarterly payments or monthly payments or a 20% discount or whatever it is they're asking for. If you feel it's unreasonable, before granting any concessions and saying, because what happens is a customer says, or a salesperson says, 20%, like the customer's throwing out numbers, it means that there's a chance, right? Like they're saying there's a chance, we're in the running. And so I got to figure out how I can give these quarterly payments or 20% discount because I want to win this deal. When in reality, if you just kind of hung tough a little bit, right? And you go back to the customer and you say, hey, look, I'd love to see, what we can do to make this happen for you. I'll tell you, quarterly payments, that's a hard thing to get. I haven't seen many customers in this kind of situation get that. Do you mind if I ask, is this a deal breaker? If I can't get that for you, are we not doing business together, right? And the funny thing is that, as people, as individuals, we tend to psych ourselves out, right? We think, well, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly put that back to the customer because what if they say no? I actually go into that topic more explicitly in this article. I call it the easiest month-end negotiation tactic. And there's some really interesting research here that was written up in an article and subsequent book by Vanessa Bond. And she is a researcher at Cornell University. And she wrote this article called You're Already More Persuasive Than You Think. I think she actually came out with a book by that name more recently as well. And she says, we tend to have a lot of misconceptions about our influence over people. It's like we go out to the club and we see this attractive person, kind of across the way, and we think that they're out of our league and there's no way they would ever go out with us and we shouldn't go talk to them. Meanwhile, they go home alone because everyone else thinks like you, right? And so in these discoveries, in these kind of scientific experiments, they actually went to people and they said, and this is kind of how they prove this out, right? They kind of stop people. Imagine you and I are kind of standing on a street corner somewhere, and I say to you, how about this? This is what we're going to do. You see people walking by? We're going to stop them, and we're going to ask each person if we can borrow their cell phone to make a phone call. Now, I ask you, I say, how many people do you think we're going to need to stop and ask this question to until we find someone who's willing to lend us their cell phone? How many people do you think, right? And what was interesting was you make your guess, and then we actually start asking people, and we see how many people it actually took to lend us a cell phone. And they did this in a few different scenarios. They did it with a cell phone. They did it with one where it was to fill out a questionnaire. So like, hey, how many people do you think it's going to take to fill out a questionnaire? They even did one where they said, how many people do you think it's going to take to get someone to agree to come to the library with us and deface a book, right? Like scribble in a book. And what was really interesting was that, and I'm going to show you the data here, the predicted number of people was categorically higher in all instances than the actual number of people that it took to get to agree to the request. So the take-home message here, as Vanessa Bond says, is you are more powerful than you think. And I've been in these situations before. I had reps come to me, for example, at Salesforce saying, it was the end of the month, end of the quarter. Hey, David, I got this deal on the line. They're ready to go. They just need quarterly payments. Can we do that? And I'm like, I don't know. What happens if you go back and tell them no, right? I don't necessarily want to have to give quarterly payments. Go back and tell them no. And the rep, I remember in this one particular instance, said, David, like we got this deal on the line here. Like I don't want to mess this up by going back to the. And so I had this conversation around, are we the selected vendor? Does the customer want to go with us? Do we have a good case? Like, do you have a good relationship? Yes. Great. The likelihood of them saying no is actually quite low now. And even if they come back and say, yes, quarterly payments are a deal breaker, we can always go back and negotiate that. And so what does he do? He goes away, comes back. He's like, hey, David, good news. Quarterly payments wasn't a deal breaker. They were asking just to ask. And that actually happens so often. But it also raises a really good point. So my take-home message here is, if you're thinking of granting a concession to the customers, making a end-of-period concession in a high-pressure, kind of period, you can push back, right? You have more power than you think. And the funny thing is, back to this point number one that I talked about, stay calm and believe in your value. That narrative that I just kind of referred to around asking the customer, like, hey, are we the selected vendor? Are we the preferred vendor? Would the customer choose us? If the customer says, oh yeah, we're looking at you and another vendor, you can always say, hey, look, if price wasn't the issue, like who would you be going with? Or if whatever wasn't the issue, who would you be going with? And if they say, well, we prefer you, then even if we end up charging more, even if there's a concession on the table at the end of the month, end of the quarter, it'd be very difficult for this customer to actually move from the mental state of choosing you to someone completely else. So you have more power than you think, especially when your customer has verbally committed to you that you are in the driver's seat as far as the negotiation or the preferred vendor status goes. So keep that in mind. The last thing I want to talk about as it relates to negotiating at month end or quarter end in these high pressure periods, and this is actually one of the most nuanced and important things that we're going to talk about today. And just to kind of set this up for you, because here's what happens. It's the end of your big selling period, and you offer some kind of concession to have the customer sign by the close of business in that period. And what happens is, for whatever reason, the customer can't get it done, right? So you keep talking about these discounts and these flexible payment terms or whatever it is. The customer says, oh, yeah, David, we can get it done. And then lo and behold, deal doesn't get signed. It happens. And then what happens is they come back at the beginning of the next month and they say, David, the discount you promised, the payment terms you promised, all these concessions, we would still like those, right? Now, if you grant them, then you're basically, capitulating and you're having this unilateral concession, which is something we do not want to do when we negotiate with our customers, because then it just becomes we just made it cheaper and easier and better and whatever for no reason, right? We always want to get something when we give something. And so it's really, really important, okay? Listen up, everyone. Before you give a customer a concession or speak about specific concessions, you want to make sure that you see the path to getting what you want. And specifically what I'm referring to here is you need to confirm the ability for the customer to execute that contract before you even grant or discuss specific concessions. So to give you an example of what this sounds like, let's say the customer is saying, you go to the customer and you say, oh, hey, we might be able to do like a 30% discount if you're able to sign this month. And the customer says, oh, that sounds great. Yeah, send the paperwork over. I think we can get it done. And it doesn't happen, okay? Then you're stuck. Versus if you said something like this, hey, hey, David, It's the end of our month, end of our quarter, whatever it is. And of course, like we're a, monthly, quarterly business. And so in some instances, I can actually make a case to my senior leadership team to give you some sort of discount in consideration for, signing by a particular date. Of course, that's valuable to us, and I want to make this valuable to you as well. I'm not sure in terms of like what specific discounts I might be able to get, but I guess my question to you is, if I were able to get something that you liked, that was amenable to you or your leadership team, what would the signing process be? And the reason by the way, I'm pulling out a lot of tactics here, which I'll show you in a second. The reason I ask is because, I think I can speak for both of us when we say, like, I don't want to go up to my leadership team and make the case for this discount or concession, put it in front of you, and then for whatever reason, despite our best efforts, the thing doesn't get signed, because I know you're going to want to come back at the beginning of next month, next period, and ask for the same thing, and why wouldn't you? And then it's going to be super difficult for me to go back internally, have that conversation, advocate on your behalf. And so I always like to kind of just be able to see my way to the finish line for both of our sakes in these situations. Now, I used a bunch of tactics there. One of the tactics I use is an objection handling tactic I referred to in my objection handling course, and I talk about it in my book. It's called Turn the Future into the Past. It's actually what I refer to as tactic number 4. And the idea behind Turn the Future into the Past is to basically say, okay, let's fast forward into the future, and let's, into the land of make-believe, and suppose that the objection was overcome, the discount was the way you wanted it, everything kind of lined up perfectly. What would happen then, right? It's a great way of kind of seeing what's on the other side of an objection. For example, a customer says, hey, David, we love your product, but it's just too expensive. And I might say, hey, look, I totally get where you're coming from. Question for you, what if it was the same price as all the other competitors? Would it be a no-brainer then? It's an example of turning the future into the past, overcoming the objection kind of in theory and kind of seeing where we stand. So the same thing applies here. And by the way, I also used another tactic I referred to in my discovery training, which is the reason I ask is because. And whenever you ask a contentious question, a question that your customer might, kind of construed as being sensitive or proprietary or being afraid to answer, giving them a reason why you're asking is really important. So when I say something like, what would the signing process be, right? Because you're kind of afraid to tell me that. That's a lot of information. The reason I ask is because, and then I tell you the reason, and the reason is why it's good for me, but also why it's good for you, because we don't want to be in this bind, kind of at the beginning of the month, end of the quarter, or the beginning of the next quarter. So this concept of being able to confirm the ability for the customer to execute before granting concessions is super important, because if for whatever reason the customer cannot sign or give you the concession that you want, why would you ever want to throw out this big matzo ball of a concession and have that sitting out there for the customer to jump on the next month or quarter? It's going to erode not only your internal credibility, but it's going to make it very difficult for the customer as well, because now they have to, even if you decide to hang tough, you got to make the customer go back and have a difficult conversation internally for them. So being able to confirm the ability to execute before we grant the concession is always the best policy. Now, if you want to read a little bit more about some of these tactics, I do have an article actually here. It's called 4 Tips for Negotiating at Month End. There's a little bonus one in there for you, actually probably a couple bonuses. But hopefully you found this session helpful. There's a lot, obviously, of emotions that run high when we find ourselves in these very high pressure quota periods. But if you just keep a level head, right? Like confirm the ability to discount before you, or confirm the ability to sign before you execute and start wanting to discount, and hanging tough there, right? And asking if the things that are being asked for are actual deal breakers, because oftentimes they won't be, you are going to come out ahead. So I wish you all of the best in your month, quarter, year-end negotiations. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Sales Lab Live, and we'll see you again on the next one.